prepare yourself to dive into your soul and get really honest with yourself, and know that we're not going to ask you to share any of these responses. So this is just for you. And so buckle up.
Super grateful to be back with you talking about the alchemy of success. So, as Tom mentioned, some of you will be the adult in the room, some of you will hire a different adult in the room. This alchemy of success is what we have seen in helping hundreds of people open microschools as kind of the foundational pieces that can come together to create a successful microschool. And we have chosen the word alchemy really intentionally. If you are familiar with alchemy, it's this kind of pre-chemistry idea of taking base metals and turning them into something precious, usually gold. And we really believe that these attributes can come together to create something greater than themselves. As Tom mentioned, it's really important, though, to see these things as a spectrum. This is not about some perfect ideal expression of these attributes. And different people will bring a different chemistry of these attributes to their microschool and end up creating really successful, beautiful microschools. So it's not about ideals or identical representation across these attributes, but rather really reflecting for yourself about where you fall in that spectrum and what that attribute means to you, what that's going to look like in your microschool. So that being said, we're going to jump in, grab like a scratch piece of paper and a broken crayon. It really doesn't matter. These scores are just for yourself. I do think it's interesting to save them and reflect back on them. For each of the categories, I'm going to give you a kind of 1 to 10 spectrum that you'll rate yourself on. And I'll always define 1 is this, 10 is this. You get to decide where you fall in that. And again, no one's going to ask you to share these scores. So I really invite you to be honest and reflect with yourself about where you are and what that might look like in your microschool. So let's jump in. The first is really a dichotomy. It's this space of between curiosity and judgment. And what I will offer you in evaluating these ideas for yourself is to consider for yourself how you approach people and situations. Do you tend towards judgment about what you think is happening, the story that you tell yourself about that person or situation, or do you tend towards curiosity, wondering about why the situation is or why this person is the way that they are? Again, this is a spectrum. All of us on different days might fall in different places with regard to this. But the reason that we have found this to be part of the alchemy of success is that we have found for people who are able to approach situations with curiosity, they have a wider array of solutions available to them when problems arise. And so when you think about yourself in relation to your microschool, really consider for yourself, which direction is your innate leaning? Is it towards curiosity? Is it towards judgment? Both of those attributes can be useful in certain contexts. But when we think about that openness to possibilities, openness to people, curiosity often brings us that more easily. So in this instance, I'm going to invite you to rate yourself between judgment and curiosity. We'll make judgment a 1 and curiosity a 10. 1 is I have 0 curiosity about people, places, and events, and I assume that I know everything that's going on in that situation. And a 10 is I assume that I have a very small slice of information and I'm really, really curious about all the other information that could lead to me understanding this person or situation better. Our next attribute is lifelong learning. So one of the reasons that this exists in our alchemy of success is that we have really seen the correlation between the adult in the room and how they approach learning and their philosophical beliefs about themselves as a learner impacts the learners in their environment. We cannot expect our students to show up to our learning environment more fully than we are capable of ourselves. And you'll hear me talk about this several times throughout my presentation, because I just believe so strongly in the truth of this. I have seen it reflected in my own classroom over and over again. And so when you think about yourself as a lifelong learner, I would invite you to really broaden this category up. We often think about learning in really strictly academic senses. When's the last time you solved a calculus problem? When is the last time you did the New York crossword puzzle in ink? Those are certainly examples of learning, but they are not the only type of learning that we do. And so I would really invite you to think about your openness to learning something. When is the last time you learned to do crochet stitch? That is always a tongue twister. Or a new recipe, or how does it clean your dishwasher or fix your dishwasher. There are so many things that we have opportunity to learn in our day-to-day lives. So as you think about yourself as a lifelong learner, let's create a scale that puts at a 1, I am really closed off to learning anything, and I actively try to avoid opportunities for learning. And let's put at a 10, I am so excited to learn new things. I actively seek out new opportunities for learning. Again, doesn't have to be academic in nature. It could be how to do a new embroidery stitch. So rate yourself as a lifelong learner. And let's talk about shared power. So shared power is a concept that can make some people really uncomfortable. So I want to start with kind of a definition about what we're talking about here. Shared power is really, how do people in an environment, whether that's a microschool or a family or a park, have access to making decisions that affect everybody. So it isn't necessarily about being the decider, but it's about the access to decisions that affect you. And why this is valuable in successful microschools really has to do with creating strong sense of community and agency for the people involved in that community. When you think about yourself in relation to shared power, I would invite you to think of the spectrum like this. On one side, you have a really hierarchical top-down approach that says power always resides with a singular person, and everybody else has layers of possible access to that power, but everybody has less than that primary person, and there's a hierarchy that moves downward of who has access to power. And at the other end of a spectrum, I would put shared power. Everybody has access to decision making and information with regard to what happens to them. That does not mean that they are always the decider. So I want to be really clear that shared power isn't about laissez-faire classroom management of everyone can just do whatever they want, but rather about everybody having access to making decisions that affect both themselves and the community, and that there's transparency about how that power is executed in your environment. So at a 1, let's put that hierarchical top-down approach that says one person should have power and everyone else should be kind of following that singular point of power. And at a 10, let's put shared access to power, that everyone has an opportunity to have a voice and some capacity of decision-making power in that environment. And if at any time this is unclear and you have questions, please jump in. Don't be afraid to stop me. I am always a person who is open to questioning, and I don't mind stopping to answer questions. So I just want to put that out there to invite that into our conversation. The next attribute, and I apologize, my type on my slide is slightly off, but the next attribute is capacity and mental load. And capacity and mental load are sort of separate, but they're also really connected. And so that's why we present them together. And I will offer you capacity first, and then we'll talk a little bit about mental load. Capacity is really, what are all of the things in your life that are taking up your emotional and physical bandwidth? So as you think about your micro school, how much capacity do you have for the emotional energy, the time that it's going to take to be invested in that? And as you think about that, I will invite you to think about the students in your learning environment and also their families. When I first started my micro school, Rochelle offered me a really incredible piece of wisdom, which was that it isn't just about my capacity for my learners. I'm a person who is really comfortable capping my micro school at 8 learners. Tend to take a lot of folks with additional needs, and so I cap my program to address those needs. But I was still finding myself struggling a little bit, and Rochelle offered me this piece of wisdom that helped me see it's not just what happens in my micro school, it's also how much capacity do I have for interaction with those adults? What is their need as they come into my micro school? And you will see families who have a variety of needs. You have families who really need the school to function as a safe place for their child to be while they are off working. They will probably have a very low rate of interaction with you. And you will have other parents who are like, can I FaceTime into every learning opportunity that you have in your micro school? And that's a different level of bandwidth that you may need for that parent. So as you think about your capacity for operating a micro school, you want to kind of take yourself through some hypotheticals on what that might look like and what you personally have the capacity to hold on to. For some folks, uh, they might be juggling a toddler and aging parents that they are caring for and feel like they don't have 10 seconds to themselves. And that might really exclude them from running a micro school right now. In another situation, you might have very similar demands with a toddler and a aging parent or someone else that you're caring for. And a micro school might be the perfect solution or puzzle piece to fit in that dynamic, because it gives you a sense of agency and something that you are doing that's outside of all of those other demands. So it really is kind of a personal assessment of how much bandwidth you have and what that's going to look like for you. And the reason that we include mental load in that is that there's the physical, I have to pick up my kids at 3 and I've got to make sure that grandpa gets to his doctor's appointments. And then there's the mental, that how much energy does each student need, does each family need from you, and how much do you have to give? So as you think about yourself with regard to capacity and mental load, let's create a spectrum that says at a 1, your plate is so very full that you cannot fathom putting one more thing on it. And in fact, there are things spilling over the side. And at a 10 is you have enough space on your plate that you are actively looking for things to add to your plate. And again, this isn't about perfect representation. We probably all vary a bit week to week, day to day. This is really about your own assessment for yourself of where you are today. Let's talk about adaptability. Adaptability is a skill that has been really useful to me, both in my career as an educator, but also from the standpoint of running my micro school. So as you think about adaptability, this applies in your classroom to how readily you are able to switch gears and adapt things when necessary, but it also applies to your business. Microschooling is an incredibly rapidly growing movement, and things are changing frequently. So your adaptability applies also to your business. And as we kind of decide how we want to score ourselves here, I would say at a 1 is I am really not comfortable with change, and I actively avoid any changes to my schedule. And again, there is no moral one-upmanship here or anything like that. This is about your own assessment. At a 10, let's put I have plans A, B, C, D, E, F, and R in my back pocket, and I am readily looking for places to be adaptable. Enthusiasm is one of my favorite attributes. And the reason is, well, I'm kind of enthusiastic about this, but also enthusiasm often carries the day. If you have created relationship with your learners and you show up with genuine enthusiasm, it really can carry them into a topic that they otherwise might turn their nose up at. I started in early childhood, but I now frequently work with mostly teens. And there are days that I know I can see on their face, I present some idea and they're like, oh no, what is Miss Lorian up to now? What does she think is going to be super interesting to us all? And so, they're skeptical, but because we have relationship and because I have come in with genuine enthusiasm, they're often at least willing to go along for the ride. Enthusiasm is often contagious. And so when you think about enthusiasm in your microschool, I would encourage you to not necessarily think of it in terms of super bubbly excitement. This doesn't mean you always show up in like a matching outfit that matches your unit. Some people's enthusiasm is really quiet, but they're genuinely excited to be doing what they're doing. And that will carry through to our learners. So let's make a scale here that says at a 1 is I'm really not enthusiastic at all. And I'm kind of just here to check the boxes and do the things because that's what has to be done. And 10 is I am so excited to be here and share things with you that I literally can't wait to share the things that I have going on in my head with you. So again, not about perfect representation. Probably none of us are all 1s or all 2s and even on our best or worst days. Let's talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability is an incredibly important attribute for a couple of reasons. We are nearing on time, so I'm going to try and keep this really brief. But vulnerability is one of those places where we cannot ask our students to show up more fully than we have shown up ourselves. And what that looks like in microschooling is both the emotional side of things, but also the intellectual side of things. If you are a person who is really uncomfortable with vulnerability, it might be very difficult for you to say that you don't know something or that you have made a mistake. And if you as the adult are not able to do that, your learners will not be able to do that either. So vulnerability in that academic sense to talk about what we do or don't know sets the stage for our learners. The other place that this comes into play is with relation to the emotional side of things and emotional safety. So I am a real proponent of appropriate emotional vulnerability with my students. I realized much later than I would care to admit in my parenting and my teaching career that I was not always honest with my students and my children. And I was not creating congruency between what I was saying and what was clear about my emotional state. Miss Lorian, are you upset? Oh, no, I'm not upset. I'm frustrated. And I would mitigate what my emotional state was to kind of make it palatable. And it has been a real learning journey for me to see the damage that that was doing, the incongruency that I was creating between what my words were saying and what very clearly my body language or my tone was saying. And so I really encourage people to really think about your own appropriate emotional vulnerability. This isn't about making children responsible for things they shouldn't be responsible for. It is not their responsibility to take on my frustration or my anger, but being clear and honest about that opens the space for them to have experiences with their own emotions in healthy ways. So as you think about vulnerability and your microschool and the relationship to you, I would invite you to create a scale that says 1 is I really avoid vulnerability. I try to put on as much armor as I can so that no one will see the real me underneath or see my flaws. And 10 is I'm really excited to show up authentically as who I am, knowing that yeah, some people might see my flaws, but ideally it brings us into closer relationship. Emotional regulation is actually my favorite topic, but it did not start out that way. As I mentioned, I used to be really uncomfortable talking with my students about my own anger. And that was because I had this misguided belief about emotional regulation, which told me that if I was emotionally regulated, it meant I was calm all the time. It turns out that's not true, and that emotional regulation is actually about having a full range of emotional experiences and being capable of choosing your behavior regardless of that emotional state. And this is another one of those places where we cannot ask our students to show up more capable than we are. So when you think about emotional regulation for yourself, I would invite you to create a scale that says one is I try to avoid states of emotion at all costs, and I feel no capacity to choose my behavior when I am in the midst of an emotion. And 10 is I experience a full range of emotions and I feel completely in control of my behavioral choices during the experience of that emotion. Difficult conversations, because it is not if, it is when. If you run a microschool, you will have difficult conversations, whether it's with students or with adults, whether it's with internal partners, someone that you're co-teaching with, or the community. There are just lots of opportunities for difficult conversations. And difficult conversations aren't necessarily the same as a bad conversation. A difficult conversation is one that you approach feeling like there could be a bad outcome to it, like a potential rift in relationship or misunderstanding. And so difficult conversations are something that, again, will be necessary in your microschool. The scale that I would invite you to look at these on, or invite you to rate yourself on, is one is I avoid difficult conversations at all costs, even to the extent that I will take on harm for myself or additional work for myself rather than have that conversation. And 10 is I lean into difficult conversations because I see them as relationship building. Um, Again, not about perfect representation. Our final attribute is growth mindset. And you might be wondering, isn't that kind of the same as being a lifelong learner? They are both related to learning, but here's kind of the crux of the difference. Being a lifelong learner says, I'm interested in learning new things all the time. Having a growth mindset says, I believe through effort, practice, engagement, that I can grow in any capacity. So it doesn't mean you believe that you could be an Olympic gold medalist swimmer in the next Olympics, but it does mean that you believe you could grow your swimming skills, even if today you don't know how to swim at all. So this is about kind of the dichotomy between fixed mindset and growth mindset. Fixed mindset says this situation is what it is. It cannot be changed, whether it's with regard to learning or temperament. It says there is really no changing it. Growth mindset says there is always the ability for growth through effort, hard work, attention to detail, whatever the thing is that's necessary for that growth, it is possible. So as you think about this, I would invite you to rate yourself at a 1 if you are a person who believes that all things are fixed and there just is not the possibility to grow, and 10 being a belief in a capacity to grow. I have used up all of my time and then some. So I'm going to turn things very quickly back over to Rochelle. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to spend with you. Thank you so much for your time.